The moment I signed those divorce papers should have been my lowest point. My husband of 11 years, Mason Reed, the man who vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health, had abandoned me in my hospital bed while I fought for my life. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly have known while jetting off to Aspen with his mistress, was that I had quietly become the gatekeeper to his entire professional future. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales. This is the story of how I discovered my husband's betrayal and how, in the end, justice was served not through vengeance, but through truth. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Boston skyline glittered outside our penthouse windows as I arranged a vase of fresh peonies, a gift to myself for landing the Porter Foundation account. Spring in New England had always been my favorite season, a time of renewal that matched the energy I poured into my work at the prestigious Harrison Gallery, where I'd served as Director of Contemporary Art Acquisitions for the past 5 years. "Madison, I'm home," Mason called out, his footsteps echoing across our marble entryway. I smiled to myself, inhaling the sweet floral scent before turning to greet my husband. Mason Reed, Boston's golden boy of venture capital, stood framed in the doorway, his tailored navy suit and confident smile the same as when we'd first met at a charity gala 11 years ago. "There's my brilliant wife," he said, setting down his briefcase to embrace me. "Congratulations on the Porter account. That collection will put Harrison on the map nationally." I leaned into his kiss, the familiar scent of his cologne comforting, after a demanding day. "Thanks for remembering. I wasn't sure if you would, given the Westlake merger." Mason poured himself a scotch at our bar cart, the amber liquid catching the evening light. "The Westlake deal is important, but not so important. I'd forget your big win. You've been working on Porter for what, 8 months now?" "Almost a year," I corrected, watching him loosen his tie. There was something reassuring about our routine, the predictable rhythm we'd established as dual-career professionals. We were, the couple others in our circle admired, successful, compatible, seemingly balanced in our ambitions and support for one another. "I was thinking we should celebrate properly this weekend," I suggested, joining him in the living room. "Maybe that new restaurant in Beacon Hill everyone's talking about?" Mason's smile faltered slightly, so briefly I almost missed it. "This weekend? Madison, I was going to tell you. The Westlake team called an emergency strategy session in New York. I'll have to fly out Friday morning." I felt a familiar pang of disappointment, but pushed it aside. This was the dance we'd perfected over the years, accommodating last-minute changes, rescheduling celebrations, understanding that our professional lives sometimes required sacrifice. "Of course," I said, maintaining my smile. "The reservation can wait. This merger is your biggest yet." Mason squeezed my hand appreciatively. "That's why we work so well together. You get it. Not every wife would be so understanding." I did get it. I'd built my own career navigating the hyper-competitive world of fine art acquisition, often working evenings and weekends to secure collections that enhanced Harrison's reputation. Mason and I had always supported each other's ambitions, a partnership of equals who respected the demands of professional success. Later that evening, as Mason showered, I prepared dinner in our gourmet kitchen, chopping vegetables with practiced precision as I reflected on our journey together. We'd met when I was just beginning my career at a smaller gallery, and Mason was a promising associate at Sterling Partners. We'd grown together, celebrating each other's promotions and achievements. Buying this penthouse 3 years ago when Mason made partner and my salary at Harrison had nearly doubled. The perfect power couple. That's how our friends described us, often with a hint of envy. No children yet, though we'd discussed it occasionally in abstract terms of someday and when the time is right. Our lives were full with work, our circle of similarly ambitious friends, charity board positions, and twice-yearly vacations to carefully selected destinations that offered both relaxation and cultural enrichment. "Something smells amazing," Mason said, appearing in fresh clothes, hair still damp. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist as I stirred the risotto. "Just something simple," I replied, leaning back against him. These moments of domestic tranquility were what anchored us amid the chaos of our professional lives. Over dinner, Mason detailed the complexities of the Westlake merger, how Sterling Partners stood to triple their technology portfolio if they could secure the deal. His eyes lit up when he talked about work, the same way mine did when discussing an exceptional new artist or collection. "Thompson is making me lead on this one," Mason explained, refilling our wine glasses. "If we land Westlake, I'm all but guaranteed a seat on the executive committee." I raised my glass. "To the youngest executive committee member in Sterling's history." "And to the woman who makes it all possible," Mason responded, his blue eyes warm as our glasses clinked. That night, falling asleep beside my husband of 11 years, I felt secure in our partnership, confident in the life we'd built together. Yes, there were occasional disappointments, rescheduled dates, missed anniversaries, nights when one or both of us worked late, but these seemed small sacrifices for the successful life we'd created. If I had known then that our carefully constructed reality was built on quicksand, would I have done anything differently? It's hard to say. The signs were there, subtle shifts I'd rationalized away, because they didn't fit the narrative I believed in. The first hint came 2 weeks later. I was at my desk at Harrison, reviewing acquisition proposals for an upcoming exhibition when my assistant Tara knocked on my open door. "Sorry to interrupt, Madison, but your doctor's office called. They need you to call back about some test results." I frowned, setting down my pen. I'd had my annual physical the week before, standard blood work, the usual screenings for a woman. Approaching 40. Nothing I expected to hear back about so quickly. "Thanks, Tara. I'll call them now." The conversation with Dr. Patel's nurse was brief but concerning. "Some abnormalities in your blood work, Mrs. Reed. Dr. Patel would like you to come in for additional tests. Tomorrow, if possible." I agreed to the 9 a.m. appointment, brushing off a flicker of worry. I was healthy, exercised regularly, and maintained a balanced diet despite our busy schedule. This was probably nothing, an anomaly in the lab results. Perhaps. That evening, I mentioned it casually to Mason over dinner. "I need to go back for some follow-up tests tomorrow morning. Probably nothing, but they want to check." Mason set down his fork, concerned about crossing his features. "What kind of tests? Did they say what they found?" "Just abnormalities in my blood work. Very specific, right?" I attempted a light tone. "I'm sure it's nothing serious." Mason reached across the table for my hand. "I'll go with you." "The Westlake numbers can wait a few hours." I squeezed his hand gratefully. "That would be nice, actually. The appointment is at 9. In that moment, I felt that familiar reassurance. Mason and I facing life's uncertainties together, a united front against whatever came our way. It never occurred to me that this small medical concern would become the crack that would eventually shatter everything. The waiting room at Boston Medical Group was quiet the next morning. Just a few other patients thumbing through outdated magazines or scrolling on their phones. Mason sat beside me, occasionally checking emails on his phone but mostly present, his leg pressed reassuringly against mine. When the nurse called my name, Mason gave my hand a final squeeze. "I'll be right here." The additional tests Dr. Patel ordered were more extensive than I'd anticipated. More blood work, an ultrasound, a specialized scan that required me to remain perfectly still while a machine hummed and clicked around me. Through it all, the medical staff maintained professional expressions that revealed nothing, which only heightened my growing anxiety. Finally, I was shown to Dr. Patel's office, rather than an exam room, another sign that this wasn't routine. The doctor entered shortly after, her normally warm expression serious as she carried a folder of results. "Madison," she began, taking a seat across from me. "Thank you for coming in so promptly." "You're worrying me, Dr. Patel," I said, attempting a smile that felt forced. She nodded, acknowledging my concern. "The abnormalities in your initial blood work indicated we needed to look more closely at your liver function. The scans we did today confirm what I suspected. You have a tumor on your liver." The word tumor hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. My throat tightened. "A tumor," I repeated. "Cancer?" "We won't know definitively until we biopsy it. But yes, that's our primary concern. The size and location suggest it's a hepatocellular carcinoma, a primary liver cancer." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Dr. Patel continued explaining next steps, scheduling a biopsy, consulting with oncologists, developing a treatment plan. Her voice sounded distant, as though I was hearing her through water. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." "I know this is overwhelming," she said, her tone gentle. "Would you like me to bring your husband in to discuss this together?" "Mason?" "Yes. Mason would help me process this, would ask the questions my shocked mind couldn't formulate." "Please," I managed to say. When Mason entered the office, his face immediately registered the gravity of the situation. He took the seat beside me, reaching for my hand as Dr. Patel repeated her findings and recommendations. Unlike me, Mason responded with focused clarity, asking about treatment options, success rates, specialists we should consult. His questions anchored me, pulling me back from the edge of panic toward something resembling a plan. By the time we left the medical center, we had appointments scheduled for the following week, a biopsy in 2 days, consultations with 2 different oncologists, and a meeting with a hepatologist who specialized in liver cancer. In the car, Mason reached across the console to take my hand. "We're going to fight this, Madison. Together. Whatever it takes." I nodded, still processing the seismic shift in my reality. Just yesterday, my biggest concern had been securing a particular installation piece for the upcoming exhibition. Now, everything had changed. "I should call Harrison," I said, my professional responsibilities suddenly seeming both pressing and trivial. "And my parents." "Let me help with that," Mason offered. "You don't have to handle everything right now." That evening, Mason was extraordinary, calling my parents to explain the situation in calm, measured terms, contacting Harrison to arrange for my temporary absence, researching liver cancer treatment options, and still finding time to hold me when the waves of fear became overwhelming. "We've got this," he kept saying, his certainty a lifeline I clung to. One step at a time. Over the next week, as the reality of my diagnosis settled in, Stage 2 hepatocellular carcinoma, requiring immediate treatment, Mason became my advocate, my researcher, my rock. He rearranged his schedule to accompany me to appointments, took meticulous notes during doctor consultations, and created a detailed calendar of treatments and medications. "Thompson understands completely," he assured me when I expressed concern about the Westlake merger. "Some things are more important than business deals." The treatment plan developed by my medical team was aggressive, a surgical resection to remove the tumor, followed by targeted therapy to ensure no cancer cells remained. The surgery was scheduled for the following month, giving my body time to prepare and allowing the medical team to conduct additional tests to confirm the cancer hadn't spread beyond my liver. Throughout those early weeks, Mason was everything I could have hoped for in a partner facing crisis. He accompanied me to every appointment, asked insightful questions, researched clinical trials and alternative treatments, all while managing his own workload at Sterling Partners. "I've told Thompson I need to scale back my travel until your surgery is behind us," he informed me one evening as we reviewed my medication schedule. The Westlake team will have to come to Boston if they need face-to-face meetings. I felt a surge of gratitude amid the fear that had become my constant companion. I don't know how I'd do this without you. Mason kissed my forehead. You don't have to find out. As my surgery date approached, I found myself reflecting on our marriage with renewed appreciation. Yes, we'd both prioritized our careers, sometimes at the expense of deeper connection, but when it truly mattered, we showed up for each other. The thought gave me comfort as I faced the terrifying prospect of having my abdomen cut open and part of my liver removed. 3 days before my scheduled surgery, I woke to find Mason already dressed, his travel bag packed and sitting by our bedroom door. Confusion clouded my still groggy mind. Where are you going? I asked, pushing myself up against the pillows, feeling the now familiar ache in my side where the tumor pressed against surrounding tissues. Mason looked startled, as though he hadn't expected me to wake. Madison, good morning. He sat on the edge of the bed, his expression carefully composed. There's an emergency with the Westlake merger. Thompson needs me in New York today. Today? I echoed, a cold feeling spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with my illness. But the pre-surgical consultation is this afternoon, and the surgery is in 3 days. Mason took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm in a gesture that had always comforted me. I know, and I'm sorry. This wasn't planned. Westlake's board is wavering on the deal structure, and Thompson says if we don't resolve it immediately, the whole merger could collapse. I withdrew my hand, something hard and resistant forming in my chest. Mason, I'm having major surgery in 3 days to remove cancer from my body. I know, Madison, he said, his voice taking on the slightly patronizing tone he sometimes used when he thought I was being unreasonable. And I'll be back tomorrow night at the latest. Plenty of time before your surgery. And the pre-surgical consultation today? He sighed, checking his watch. Your mother already offered to take you. She's coming at noon, remember? All the major decisions have been made, Madison. Today is just procedural. I stared at him, seeing something I hadn't allowed myself to notice before, a distance in his eyes, a slight impatience in his posture, as though my cancer and its treatment had become an inconvenient disruption to his real priorities. Go, I said finally, turning away from him. Clearly, Westlake can't wait. Mason leaned down to kiss my cheek, his lips barely grazing my skin. I'll call you tonight. Try not to worry about today. The surgical team knows what they're doing, and your mother will take excellent notes. After he left, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, an uncomfortable realization forming. Mason's dedicated presence during my early diagnosis, the appointments, the research, the unwavering support, had coincided with the initial phases of the Westlake merger. As the deal had progressed, his attention had gradually shifted back to work, his absences becoming more frequent, explained away with increasingly urgent emergencies at Sterling Partners. My mother arrived as promised, her concerned face and warm embrace a sharp contrast to Mason's distracted departure that morning. "Where's Mason?" she asked, looking around our empty penthouse. "New York," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Emergency meetings." My mother's expression tightened, but she said nothing, focusing instead on making sure I had everything I needed for the consultation. As we drove to the hospital, she finally spoke her mind. "This isn't the first time he's been absent lately, is it?" I considered deflecting, defending Mason as I had been doing instinctively, but something in me had shifted. "No," I admitted. "It's becoming a pattern." My mother reached over to squeeze my hand. "You need to focus on healing now, Madison. Everything else can wait." She was right, of course. The pre-surgical consultation was detailed and somewhat overwhelming, with the surgical team explaining exactly what would happen during the procedure, the recovery process, and potential complications. My mother took careful notes, asked pertinent questions, and generally provided the support Mason should have been there to offer. That night, Mason called as promised, his voice echoing slightly as though he was calling from a large space with background noise I couldn't quite identify. "How did the consultation go?" he asked, his tone suggesting divided attention. "Fine," I replied, suddenly too tired to provide details he could have heard firsthand if he'd been there. "The surgical team seems confident." "That's great, Madison. I knew it would go well." A muffled voice spoke in the background, and Mason covered the phone briefly before returning. "Listen, I need to go. We're in the middle of negotiations. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" Before I could respond, he had ended the call. I sat in our silent penthouse, the stack of pre-surgical instructions beside me, and allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been trying to ignore. Something was very wrong with my marriage, and it had nothing to do with my cancer. The next day passed without word from Mason. No calls, no texts, not even an email. By evening, concern began to override my anger and disappointment. This wasn't like him, even with his recent emotional distance. I tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called his assistant at Sterling Partners, only to be told she hadn't heard from him since he left for New York the previous day. A knot of worry formed in my stomach. Had something happened to him? An accident? I was about to call Thompson, Mason's boss, when my phone rang. An unknown number with a New York area code. "Mrs. Reed?" a female voice asked when I answered. "This is Clarissa Jenkins from the Plaza Hotel in New York. I'm calling because there appears to be an issue with Mr. Reed's credit card." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by confusion. "His credit card? What kind of issue?" "The card was declined when we tried to process the extended stay," she explained. "Mr. Reed and his guest have requested to remain an additional 3 nights, but will need an alternative form of payment." My mind snagged on 2 words: guest and 3 nights. "I see," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And this guest is?" A slight hesitation. "Ms. Brooke Chandler. They're in our penthouse suite." The room seemed to tilt around me, much as it had when Dr. Patel first mentioned the word tumor. But this was a different kind of shock. Not the fear of physical illness, but the sickening realization of betrayal. "Mrs. Reed, are you there?" I cleared my throat. "Yes. I'm sorry, but I won't be providing an alternative payment method. My husband was expected home today for my cancer surgery tomorrow." A startled silence followed. I'm very sorry to hear that, Mrs. Reed. I wasn't aware." "No, of course you weren't," I said, a strange calm descending over me. "Thank you for calling." After ending the call, I sat motionless in our living room, the pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. The increasing absences, the distracted phone calls, the gradual emotional withdrawal, all while I was fighting the most frightening battle of my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Mason. "Negotiations running long. We'll fly back early tomorrow. Morning. Don't worry." I stared at his message, a lie so blatant it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. In that moment, something crystallized within me, a resolve that cut through the fog of betrayal and hurt. Mason had made his choice, and now I would make mine. I called my mother. "Can you come stay with me tonight and take me to the hospital? Tomorrow?" "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay? Is Mason still in New York?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Mason is definitely still in New York. I'll explain when you get here." As I waited for my mother to arrive, I opened my laptop and accessed our shared cloud storage, the digital repository where we kept important documents, including Mason's work files that he sometimes reviewed at home. As director of contemporary art acquisitions at Harrison, I had developed a meticulous eye for detail and organization. Now, I turned that professional focus toward understanding exactly what my husband had sacrificed our marriage for. The Westlake merger files were extensive, containing hundreds of documents, spreadsheets, and presentation decks. I began systematically reviewing them, my art historian's training allowing me to quickly identify patterns and significant elements. What I discovered sent a chill down my spine, not because of what was there, but because of what I already knew. The Westlake merger documents revealed something that, in any other circumstance, might have seemed insignificant. But tonight, as my surgery loomed and my husband lay in the arms of another woman, these details took on profound importance. 3 months ago, Harrison Gallery had been approached about acquiring a private collection of contemporary works owned by the Westlake family. As director of contemporary art acquisitions, I had personally handled the negotiations, meeting several times with Eleanor Westlake, the family matriarch. During those meetings, Eleanor had spoken at length about her family's business interests, including their technology company's approach to potential partnerships. "We value integrity above all," Eleanor had told me over tea in her Beacon Hill home. "My father built this company on handshake deals that he always honored, even when it cost him. We've turned down more lucrative offers because we didn't trust the character of the people involved." This conversation had seemed like pleasant small talk at the time, the kind of relationship building that was part of my job. I'd mentioned it to Mason in passing, but hadn't thought to connect it to his work until now. As I reviewed the merger documents, I noticed that Sterling Partners' approach to Westlake Technologies didn't align with what Eleanor had shared about her family's values. The acquisition strategy relied heavily on leveraging debt against Westlake's assets, potentially compromising the company's long-standing employee profit-sharing program. More troubling, there were indications that post-merger, Sterling planned to offshore significant portions of Westlake's manufacturing division, directly contradicting assurances Mason's team had apparently made during preliminary negotiations. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my discovery. My mother had arrived, her face etched with concern as I opened the door. "Madison, what's happening? You sounded strange on the phone." I led her to the living room, offering her a seat before carefully explaining what I had learned about Mason's whereabouts and his companion. My mother's expression shifted from shock to anger to profound sadness. "On the eve of your surgery? How could he?" I nodded, the reality still settling around me like heavy snow. "I've just discovered something else," I continued, gesturing to my laptop. "The Westlake merger he's supposedly negotiating. I have information that could significantly impact those negotiations." I explained my connection to Eleanor Westlake and what I had learned about the family's business philosophy, contrasting it with the approach outlined in Mason's documents. The Westlakes would never agree to these terms if they understood the full implications, I concluded. My mother studied me carefully. "What are you thinking of doing, Madison?" It was a fair question, one I was still formulating an answer to myself. The betrayal was still too fresh, the shock still reverberating through my system. But beneath the hurt, a cold clarity was emerging. "Right. Now I'm focusing on tomorrow's surgery," I said finally. "I need to get through that first. But afterward..." I glanced at the laptop screen, where a particularly revealing document was displayed. "Afterward, I'll decide what to do with this information." My mother nodded, reaching for my hand. "One step at a time. Let's get you through tomorrow." That night, I slept fitfully in our guest bedroom, unwilling to lie in the bed I had shared with Mason. My phone remained silent. No further messages from my husband, no explanation for his absence, no questions about my pre-surgical preparation. Morning came with a sense of surreal detachment. Today, surgeons would cut open my body and remove part of my liver, along with the cancer that had taken root there. This should have been my only concern. Yet my mind kept returning to the Plaza Hotel and the woman named Brooke Chandler, who was sharing the penthouse suite with my husband. As my mother helped me prepare for the hospital, gathering the items, On my pre-surgical checklist, my phone finally chimed with a message from Mason. Flight delayed due to weather. Catching next available. We'll meet you at the hospital. Another lie. I checked the New York weather and flight status reports. Clear skies, no delays. I didn't bother responding. At the hospital, the check-in process was efficient but impersonal. Forms to sign, insurance cards to present, ID bracelets to wear. My mother stayed close, her quiet strength a counterpoint to the anxiety buzzing in my veins. Mrs. Reed? A nurse appeared with a clipboard. We're ready to begin your pre-op preparation. Your surgical team will be in shortly to review the procedure one final time. I glanced at the waiting room entrance, half expecting Mason to appear, despite knowing he wouldn't. My husband isn't here yet, I said, hating how vulnerable those words made me sound. The nurse's expression softened with understanding. We can wait a few more minutes if you'd like. I shook my head. No. Let's proceed. As I changed into a hospital gown and allowed the nurses to insert my IV line, I thought about the collection of contemporary art I had secured for Harrison just before my diagnosis. Pieces that challenged conventional perspectives, forcing viewers to reconsider their assumptions about reality. How fitting that my own reality was now being radically reframed. Dr. Harrington, my surgical oncologist, arrived to review the procedure once more. We'll be removing the right lobe of your liver, along with the tumor, he explained. Liver tissue has remarkable regenerative properties, so over time, the remaining portion will actually grow to compensate for what we're removing. I nodded, clinging to this one hopeful detail amidst the day's darkness. My body could regenerate, rebuild itself after this trauma. Perhaps my life could do the same. Is your husband joining us? Dr. Harrington asked, glancing at his watch. No, I said firmly. He's unavailable. My mother has a medical power of attorney. The doctor nodded, making a note in my chart. Very well. The anesthesiologist will be in shortly. We'll take good care of you, Mrs. Reed. As the preoperative medications began flowing through my IV, inducing a pleasant haziness, I found myself thinking about the Westlake documents again. The information I possessed wasn't just business intelligence. It was leverage, a form of power I had never sought nor wanted. But it had fallen into my hands at precisely the moment when my husband had revealed his true character. The anesthesiologist explained the sedation process, but his words seemed to come from far away. My mother squeezed my hand one last time before the surgical team arrived to wheel me toward the operating room. I love you, Madison, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I'll be right here when you wake up. As the bright lights of the hallway passed overhead, I tried to focus on survival, not just of the surgery, but of whatever came after. The last thought I had before the anesthesia pulled me under was oddly clear. When I woke up, I would be different. Not just physically altered by the surgeon's knife, but fundamentally changed by the knowledge of my husband's betrayal and the decisions that now lay before me. The return to consciousness was gradual. First awareness of discomfort, then sounds, then finally the ability to open my eyes. The recovery room was dimly lit, monitors beeping softly beside my bed. A nurse noticed I was awake and approached with a gentle smile. Welcome back, Mrs. Reed. The surgery went well. Dr. Harrington was able to remove the entire tumor. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube they had inserted during surgery. The nurse offered ice chips, which provided blessed relief. Your mother is waiting just outside, she continued, checking my vital signs. We'll move you to your room shortly, and then she can join you. I nodded, overwhelmed by competing sensations. The dull throb of pain centered in my abdomen, the lingering effects of anesthesia clouding my thoughts, and beneath it all, the persistent ache of betrayal. True to the nurse's word, I was soon transferred to a private room where my mother waited, her face lighting with relief when she saw me. Madison, she breathed, carefully taking my hand between hers. Dr. Harrington said everything went perfectly. They got all of the tumor, and the margins look clean. I managed a weak smile. Good news, I whispered, my voice still rough. She hesitated before adding, Mason called the hospital. They told him the surgery was successful. Of course he had called, the bare minimum to maintain appearances. Did he say where he was? My mother's expression tightened. He claimed his flight was delayed again, said he'd be here tomorrow morning. I closed my eyes, conserving my limited energy. Has he called you directly? No, she admitted, just the hospital. The pain medication made it difficult to hold on to my thoughts, but one remained crystal clear. Mason was continuing his deception, extending his time with Brooke Chandler while fabricating transportation problems as his excuse. Could you hand me my phone? I asked my mother. I want to check something. She hesitated. Madison, you need to rest. Whatever it is can wait until— Please, I insisted, my voice stronger now. This is important. Reluctantly, she retrieved my phone from my purse. With shaking fingers, I opened a particular app, one Mason didn't know I had installed on both our phones months ago. It was a premium feature tied to our family plan, intended to help us locate each other in case of emergency. In my security-conscious mind, it had seemed a sensible precaution. The map loaded, and there it was, Mason's location, represented by a small blue dot. Not at LaGuardia or JFK airports, not on a plane headed to Boston. The blue dot sat squarely at the Plaza Hotel, exactly where he had been all along. I showed the screen to my mother, who stared at it in dismay. Oh, Madison. Takes a special kind of man to lie about being with his mistress while his wife is in cancer surgery, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. My mother took the phone gently from my hand. You need to focus on healing right now. Mason's situation can be addressed when you're stronger. She was right, of course. The surgery had taken a tremendous physical toll, and my body's priority had to be recovery. Yet as I drifted in and out of consciousness throughout that afternoon and evening, my mind kept returning to the Westlake documents and what they revealed. I had never been vindictive by nature. My professional success has come from building relationships, finding common ground, recognizing the value in diverse perspectives. But Mason's betrayal during the most vulnerable period of my life had awakened something new in me. Not just anger, but a determination to ensure consequences. Matched actions. The night passed in a blur of vital sign checks, pain medication adjustments, and fitful sleep. Morning arrived with shafts of sunlight through the hospital blinds and the steady bustle of the day shift beginning their rounds. My mother had gone home briefly to shower and change, but promised to return by 9. As I lay alone in my hospital room, the door opened and Mason walked in. He looked immaculate in a fresh suit, his expression a careful arrangement of concern and exhaustion. Had I not known the truth, I might have believed he'd spent the night desperately trying to reach me. Madison, he said, approaching the bed cautiously. Thank God. I've been so worried. The performance would have been impressive if it weren't so grotesque. I studied him silently, noting the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume that clung to him, despite what must have been a thorough shower. The doctors say it went well, he continued, filling my silence with nervous chatter. They got the whole tumor. That's amazing news. When I still didn't respond, he reached for my hand. I withdrew it before he could touch me. Don't, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Mason blinked, momentarily dropping his concerned husband facade. Madison, I know you must be upset about yesterday. The flight delays were beyond my control and Stop lying. The words came out stronger than I expected, considering my weakened state. I know where you were, Mason. I know who you were with. His face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. What are you talking about? I was in New York, in meetings. With Brooke Chandler, in the penthouse suite at the plaza. Mason's careful expression collapsed, replaced by genuine shock. How did you— The hotel called about your credit card being declined for the extended stay, I said, a strange calm settling over me. They were quite specific about your accommodations and your guests. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, visibly recalculating his approach. Madison, this isn't what you think. Brooke is part of the Westlake legal team. We were working on contract details, and it made sense to— Don't insult what's left of our marriage with more. Lies, I interrupted. I tracked your phone. You never left the plaza, and you certainly weren't at any airport dealing with flight delays. Mason's expression hardened, the pretense of the devoted husband evaporating entirely. You tracked my phone? That's an invasion of privacy. The irony of his indignation was almost laughable. Says the man who invaded the sanctity of our marriage while I was preparing for cancer surgery. He paced at the foot of my hospital bed, his polished exterior giving way to agitation. This situation is complicated, Madison. You don't understand. The pressure I've been under with the Westlake deal. Things between us have been difficult since your diagnosis. Difficult? The word hung between us, loaded with all he had left unspoken. You mean inconvenient? My cancer was inconvenient for your lifestyle, for your ambitions, for your affair. Mason stopped pacing, his expression shifting to something calculating. Look, I never meant for you to find out this way, especially not now when you're recovering. Can we just table this discussion until you're stronger? Focus on your health first, then we can talk about ourselves, us, as if there were still an us to discuss. There's nothing to table, Mason, I said quietly. But you're right about one thing. I need to focus on my recovery right now. I'd like you to leave. He stared at me, clearly not expecting this response. Leave? Madison, be reasonable. This is a difficult time for both of us. Both of us, I repeated, letting the absurdity of his equivalence hang in the air. I'm lying here with surgical drains in my abdomen after having part of my liver removed because of cancer, while you're fresh from a luxury hotel suite where you spent the night with your mistress instead of supporting your wife. Yes, clearly we're both suffering equally. Mason's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward the door as if gauging whether anyone might overhear us, always concerned about appearances, about his carefully cultivated professional image. I'll go. If that's what you want, he said finally. But we should discuss this rationally when you're feeling better. Rational discussion would have been appropriate before you decided to cheat on your wife during her cancer treatment, I replied. Now, I think we're well beyond that stage. As Mason turned to leave, I added one final comment. I wouldn't make any irrevocable decisions about the Westlake merger just yet. He froze, turning back slowly. What does that mean? I met his gaze steadily. It means I know things about the Westlake family and their business philosophy that might impact your approach. Things Eleanor Westlake shared with me during our art acquisition discussions. Mason's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. What kind of things? The kind that would matter very much to a family that values integrity above all, I quoted, watching realization dawn on his face. You wouldn't interfere with my deal, he said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. That would be unprofessional. Almost as unprofessional as sleeping with someone from the opposing legal team, I observed mildly. Now please leave. My mother will be back soon, and I'd rather not subject her to your presence. After Mason departed, I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me in waves. The confrontation had drained what little energy I had, but there was a certain clarity in finally speaking truth to his deception. My mother returned shortly after, immediately sensing something had happened. Was Mason here? She asked, noting my elevated heart rate on the monitor beside my bed. Yes, I confirmed. It didn't go well. I recounted our conversation, including my veiled reference to the Westlake information. My mother listened without interruption, her expression growing, increasingly concerned. Madison, are you thinking of using that information against Mason somehow? It was a fair question, and one I was still grappling with myself. The Westlake documents represented power I never sought, thrust into my hands at precisely the moment I discovered my husband's betrayal. The temptation to use that power was undeniable, yet it raised ethical questions I couldn't ignore. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants him to face consequences for what he's done, but I'm not sure if using the Westlake information that way would make me much better than him. My mother sat beside my bed, gently taking my hand. There's a difference between vindictiveness and justice, Madison. Between wielding power to hurt someone and ensuring accountability for their actions. Is there? I asked, genuinely uncertain. Where's the line? She considered this thoughtfully. Intent matters, proportion matters, but most importantly, truth matters. Whatever you decide, make sure it serves truth rather than vengeance. As I drifted back to sleep, those words echoed in my mind. Truth rather than vengeance. The distinction felt important, though in my medication-hazed state, I couldn't quite articulate why. The next few days passed in a blur of doctor visits, pain management, and tentative first steps toward physical recovery. Mason didn't return to the hospital, though he sent an obscenely large flower arrangement with a card that simply read, "Wishing you a speedy recovery. We'll talk soon." I asked the nurses to donate the flowers to other patients, unable to bear their presence in my room. On my 4th day post-surgery, as I was beginning to regain some strength, I received an unexpected visitor. Tara from Harrison Gallery arrived with a tablet and a determined expression. "I know you're supposed to be resting," she said apologetically, "but there's something you need to see." "What is it?" I asked Tara, trying to sit up straighter in my hospital bed. My assistant's expression was a mixture of concern and determination as she perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. The board called an emergency meeting yesterday about the Porter Foundation collection. This was unexpected. The Porter acquisition had been finalized before my diagnosis. Contracts signed, arrangements made for transportation and installation. It represented months of careful negotiation and was set to be Harrison Gallery's most significant contemporary art acquisition in a decade. "Why?" I asked, wincing as I shifted position. Everything was settled. Tara's fingers flew across her tablet screen. That's what I thought too. But apparently Richard Sterling showed up at the meeting with concerns about the collection's valuation. The name hit me like a physical blow. Richard Sterling, founder of Sterling Partners and Mason's boss. Sterling? What does he have to do with Harrison's acquisitions? Tara looked up from her tablet. That's the strange part. He's not on our board, has no official connection to the gallery. But according to Diane, he and Director Phillips are golf buddies, and Sterling convinced him to reconsider the Porter acquisition. My mind raced, despite the fog of pain medication. This couldn't be coincidence. Richard Sterling suddenly interfering with my professional territory just as I'd confronted Mason about his affair. What exactly did Sterling say about the valuation? That's why I brought this, Tara replied, turning the tablet toward me. I recorded the meeting. You what? I stared at her in surprise. She gave a small, defiant shrug. I've been recording. All the board meetings since your diagnosis? Just audio, nothing illegal. I wanted to make sure you didn't miss anything important. A wave of gratitude washed over me. Tara had been my assistant for just over a year, but her loyalty clearly ran deeper than I'd realized. I extracted the relevant part, she said, pressing play. Richard Sterling's voice filled the space between us, smooth and authoritative. While I respect the gallery's autonomy, I feel compelled as a longtime supporter of the arts to express concern about the Porter acquisition. My financial analysts have reviewed the collection's valuation, and we believe it's significantly overpriced by contemporary market standards. Madison Reed is an excellent curator, but perhaps her recent personal challenges have affected her professional judgment. My blood ran cold at the deliberate pause before personal challenges, the way Sterling had weaponized my cancer to undermine my professional credibility. Director Phillips responded with characteristic deference. "Richard, you raise an important point. Perhaps we should postpone the acquisition until Madison returns and can address these concerns." "I'm afraid timing is critical here," Sterling countered smoothly. "The market is shifting, and waiting could expose the gallery to unnecessary financial risk. I'd recommend either renegotiating at a substantially lower valuation or withdrawing from the acquisition entirely." The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in my hospital room. "They voted to reopen negotiations with the Porter Foundation," Tara explained. "Director Phillips is reaching out to Eleanor Porter today." "Eleanor Porter? Don't you mean Eleanor Westlake?" I asked, confused by the similar names. Tara's brow furrowed. "No, Eleanor Porter, head of the Porter Foundation." I closed my eyes, piecing together the connection I'd missed until now. The Porters and the Westlakes are related by marriage. Eleanor Porter's daughter married into the Westlake family. They're the same Eleanor. Understanding dawned on Tara's face. "The same family is involved in both your Porter acquisition and Mason's merger deal?" "Yes," I confirmed, the implications crystallizing rapidly. "And Sterling is trying to sabotage my acquisition to send me a message, or perhaps as leverage for Mason." It was a calculated move, using Sterling's social connection to Director Phillips. To undermine my professional standing while I was physically unable to defend myself. The strategy was clever but transparent once you understood the players involved. "What are you going to do?" Tara asked, watching me process this new development. Carefully adjusted my position, mindful of the surgical incision across my abdomen. "First, I need my laptop. Can you bring it tomorrow?" Tara nodded, making a note. "What else?" "I need you to research something for me. Pull everything you can find on Brooke Chandler. She's an attorney connected to the Westlake negotiations. And I need to know if Richard Sterling has made any unusual public appearances or statements in the past week." "On it," Tara said, already typing on her tablet. "Anything else?" I considered my limited options from this hospital bed. "Yes. Call Eleanor Westlake Porter directly. Tell her I'm recovering from surgery, but urgently need to speak with her. In person, if possible." After Tara left, I lay back against the pillows, mind racing despite my physical exhaustion. Mason, or more likely Sterling, had escalated what began as a personal betrayal into professional warfare. They had struck first, attempting to discredit me while I was at my most vulnerable. My mother returned from the cafeteria, immediately noticing my changed demeanor. "What happened? You look upset." I explained Tara's visit and the recording, watching my mother's expression shift from concern to indignation. "They're using your illness against you professionally? That's unconscionable." "It's business," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "They see me as a threat to the Westlake deal because of what I know, so they're trying to neutralize me by damaging my professional credibility." My mother sat beside me, eyes narrowed in thought. "So Mason told his boss about your confrontation?" "He must have. And Sterling decided to take preemptive action." She squeezed my hand gently. "What will you do now?" "What I've always done," I replied. "My job, protecting Harrison's interests and my professional reputation. The fact that it might inconvenience Mason and Sterling is merely a bonus." That night, I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with fractured images. Mason in a penthouse suite, Richard Sterling at a boardroom table, Eleanor Westlake Porter examining a painting with a magnifying glass, searching for authenticity marks. I woke feeling more determined than weary. The next morning, my doctor approved my discharge. though with strict instructions for rest and limited activity for at least 2 weeks. My mother helped me gather my belongings and navigate the wheelchair that hospital policy required for departure. "You're coming to stay with me, right?" she asked as we waited for the discharge paperwork. "I've already prepared the guest room." I hesitated. The thought of returning to the penthouse I shared with Mason was unsettling, but retreating to my mother's suburban home felt like conceding territory. "I'd rather go home," I said finally. "I need my own space, my files, my computer. And I won't be alone. Tara has already volunteered to stay with me until I'm more mobile." My mother didn't look convinced. "What if Mason is there?" "He won't be," I assured her. "He texted yesterday saying he's giving me space and staying at a hotel downtown." More likely, he was avoiding a confrontation he wasn't prepared for. Mason had always excelled at strategic retreats when situations become uncomfortable. My mother drove me home with obvious reluctance, helping me settle into my penthouse with its panoramic views of Boston Harbor. The space felt both familiar and foreign, like revisiting a place you knew in childhood. Everything was where it should be, yet something fundamental had changed. Tara arrived shortly after with my laptop and a stack of research. "I'm set up in the guest room," she announced. "I brought work files too, so we can handle the Porter situation." "Any word from Eleanor Westlake Porter?" I asked, carefully lowering myself onto the living room sofa. "Her assistant said she'll call tomorrow. Apparently she's traveling back from London tonight." I nodded, unsurprised. Eleanor maintained residences in several cities, dividing her time between family obligations and foundation work. "What about Brooke Chandler?" Tara handed me a folder. "She's fascinating. Harvard Law, clerked for a federal judge, then joined Westlake's legal team 3 years ago. Rising star by all accounts." I flipped through Tara's research. Professional profiles, social media screenshots, press mentions. One photo caught my attention. Brooke at a charity gala 6 months ago, standing beside Mason, both holding champagne flutes and laughing at something outside the frame. "This was before my diagnosis," I noted, showing Tara the photo. She nodded, grimly. "I found several similar images from different events over the past year. They've known each other professionally for some time, which meant Mason's affair likely predated my cancer, a strangely validating discovery. The betrayal wasn't about my illness making me less attractive or available. It was a choice he had made while I was still healthy, still fully engaged in our marriage." "What about Sterling?" Tara's expression brightened slightly. "That's where it gets interesting. He made an unusual public statement 3 days ago, right around when you confronted Mason at the hospital." She pulled up an article on her tablet. "Sterling Partners announced they're pursuing a strategic realignment of their acquisition targets, focusing on companies that demonstrate both financial viability and ethical business practices." I read the statement twice, recognizing the subtext. They're worried about the Westlake family's reaction if they learn about the post-merger plans in Mason's documents. Exactly. And there's more. Sterling has suddenly agreed to sponsor the upcoming American Business Ethics Conference. The timing feels reactive. A smile tugged at my lips despite everything. They're trying to shore up their ethical credentials in case the Westlakes start asking questions. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the Porter acquisition documents. Confirming what I already knew, the valuation was sound, based on rigorous market analysis and authentication by respected experts. Sterling's claim of overvaluation was without merit, a transparent attempt to undermine my professional standing. By evening, fatigue had overtaken me. The surgical incision throbbed despite my medication, and the emotional strain of recent days weighed heavily. Tara insisted I eat something before taking my evening pills, preparing a simple soup that I managed to partially consume. "You should rest," she urged after clearing away the dishes. "Tomorrow will be busy if Eleanor calls." I nodded, allowing her to help me to my bedroom. Not the master suite I had shared with Mason, but the smaller guest room where I'd slept after discovering his betrayal. The master bedroom remained untouched, a space I wasn't ready to reclaim. Sleep came more easily than I'd expected, my body's need for healing overriding my racing thoughts. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the gentle chime of my phone receiving a message. It was Mason. "Hope you're recovering. Well, need to pick up some files from the office. We'll stop by around 10 if that's convenient." I stared at the message, noting the careful neutrality of his tone. Not asking permission exactly, but phrasing his intention as a courtesy notification. "Not convenient," I typed back. "Tara can let you in at 2 p.m. Please limit yourself to the office." His response came quickly. "Fine, 2 p.m. I showed Tara the exchange over breakfast, her cooking, my picking at it. "Want me to keep him away from you entirely?" she asked, refilling my tea. I considered this. "No. I think it's time we had a proper conversation, now that I'm not confined to a hospital bed. But on my terms, not his." The morning passed quickly. As I prepared for both Eleanor's potential call and Mason's visit, I showered carefully, mindful of my incision, and dressed in a loose but elegant outfit that concealed the worst of my post-surgical appearance while still projecting the professional image I wanted to maintain. At precisely 11:30, my phone rang, with an international number. "Eleanor," I greeted, recognizing the British number. "Thank you for calling." "Madison, dear." Eleanor Westlake Porter's cultured voice carried both warmth and concern. "My assistant said you've had surgery." "I do." "Hope you're recovering well." "I am, thank you. Though I've encountered an unexpected complication, one related to our acquisition agreement and, surprisingly, to your family's company." I explained the situation carefully. Sterling's intervention at the Harrison board meeting, his attempts to devalue the Porter collection, and the connection to the Westlake merger negotiations. I didn't mention Mason's affair or my personal stake in the matter, keeping the conversation strictly professional. Eleanor's response was measured but clear. "This is most disturbing. The Porter collection's valuation was thoroughly vetted by independent appraisers. For Sterling to suggest otherwise, and to use your health as justification for reconsidering, is both factually incorrect and ethically questionable." "My thoughts exactly," I agreed. "I believe Sterling's firm may be approaching the Westlake merger with similar creative interpretations." A thoughtful pause followed. "Madison, are you suggesting Sterling Partners is not negotiating in good faith with Westlake Technologies?" This was the critical moment. How much to reveal, how directly to involve myself in Mason's business affairs. "I'm suggesting," I said carefully, "that the Sterling Partners' approach to acquisitions may not align with the Westlake family's historical emphasis on ethical business practices and employee welfare. Their post-merger plans include significant changes that haven't been clearly communicated during negotiations." "I see." Eleanor's tone had cooled considerably. "That's very concerning, especially given my son-in-law's position on the Westlake board. He's been the strongest advocate for this merger." "I thought you should be aware," I said, "both as the Porter Foundation head and as a Westlake family member." "Indeed, and I appreciate your directness, Madison." A brief pause. "Regarding the Porter collection, please assure your board that I stand firmly behind our agreed valuation. In fact, I'll be calling Director Phillips myself this afternoon." After ending the call, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing what I had done. I hadn't revealed Mason's affair or directly sabotaged the Westlake deal. I had simply spoken truth to someone who deserved to hear it, allowing Eleanor to draw her own conclusions and make informed decisions about both the art collection and her family's business. Tara appeared in the doorway. "How did it go?" "Productively," I replied. "Eleanor will contact Phillips about the Porter valuation, and she may have some questions for the Westlake negotiation team as well." At precisely 2 p.m., the penthouse doorbell rang. Tara answered, admitting Mason with professional courtesy. I heard their brief exchange from my position in the living room, where I had arranged myself on the sofa with careful attention to both comfort and appearance. Madison is in the living room, Tara informed him. She's agreed to speak with you briefly after you collect your files. Mason's footsteps hesitated, then continued toward his home office. I used the 15 minutes he spent there to steady my nerves, focusing on my breathing techniques from physical therapy. When he finally appeared in the living room doorway, I was composed, ready. He looked both familiar and strange, the same Mason who had shared my life for 11 years, yet somehow a different man entirely. He carried a leather portfolio, his essential documents case that contained his most important work files. Madison, he began, hovering uncertainty at the edge of the room. You look better. Cancer surgery will set a very low baseline, I replied mildly. Please, sit down. This conversation will be easier if I'm not straining my neck to look up at you. He chose the armchair farthest from me, setting his portfolio beside him. How are you feeling? Physically? I'm recovering on schedule. The surgeon is pleased with my progress. Emotionally? I suppose that depends on how you define feeling betrayed by your spouse while fighting cancer. Mason flinched slightly but quickly recovered. I deserve that, and I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me an explanation, Mason. Your actions have been quite clear. What you owe me is a divorce that reflects both my contributions to this marriage and the manner in which you chose to end it. His expression shifted from contrite to cautious. Divorce is a significant step, Madison. Maybe when you're fully recovered, we could consider counseling or no. The word was quiet but absolute. There's no recovery from this kind of betrayal, Mason. Not for me. He studied me, reassessing the situation. Mason had always been skilled at reading people, adjusting his approach to achieve his desired outcome. It was what made him successful in business, and, apparently, in conducting an affair. I understand you're angry, he said finally. You have every right to be, but I'm concerned about some of the actions you've taken recently. Oh? I raised an eyebrow. Which actions concern you? I heard you contacted Eleanor Westlake directly, he said, his casual tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. Discussing matters related to Sterling Partners negotiations. So Sterling had already informed him of my conversation with Eleanor, or, more likely, Eleanor had questioned the Westlake team, triggering alarm bells at Sterling Partners. I spoke with Eleanor Westlake Porter about the Porter Foundation collection, I corrected, which is entirely within my professional purview as Director of Contemporary Art Acquisitions at Harrison. But you mentioned the Westlake merger. I mentioned that Richard Sterling's attempt to devalue the Porter collection might reflect a similar approach to the Westlake negotiations, which, based on the documents I've reviewed, appears to be accurate. Mason leaned forward, his expression hardening. Those documents are confidential, Madison. If you've shared proprietary information with the Westlakes— I haven't shared any documents, I interrupted. I simply expressed concern that Sterling Partners' negotiation tactics might not align with the Westlake family's established values. Eleanor is free to draw her own conclusions. His eyes narrowed. This feels like retaliation. Does it? Or does it feel like a professional exercising appropriate diligence when another professional attempts to undermine her work? I held his gaze steadily. Richard Sterling used my illness to question my competence, Mason. Did you really think I would simply accept that? Mason stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Sterling was trying to protect the firm's interests. He may have been heavy-handed, but he was attempting to intimidate a cancer patient who posed a potential threat to your merger. I finished for him. Let's not pretend this was standard business practice. For a moment, Mason's carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing genuine frustration. You have no idea what's at stake with this merger, Madison. My entire career at Sterling could depend on it. and my entire professional reputation depends on the Porter acquisition, I countered. Yet you and Sterling had no qualms about attacking. That. He turned back to face me, calculation replacing frustration. What do you want, Madison? To punish me? To sabotage the Westlake deal? It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself since discovering his betrayal. What did I truly want from this situation? I want what I've always wanted, I replied honestly. To do my job well, to be respected professionally, and to be treated with basic human decency. The fact that maintaining those things might inconvenience you and Sterling is incidental. Mason studied me, clearly trying to determine if I was being truthful or merely strategic. And our marriage? End the moment you chose to be with Brooke Chandler during my cancer surgery, I said simply. All that remains is the legal dissolution. He flinched at Brooke's name, the first time I had mentioned her directly. I never meant to hurt you, Madison. The statement was so absurd, so disconnected from the reality of his actions that I almost laughed. Intention doesn't negate impact. Mason, you made choices that guaranteed hurt. Own them at least. Our conversation was interrupted by Tara's discreet knock. Sorry to interrupt, but Eleanor Westlake Porter is on the line again, Madison. She says it's urgent. Take the call, Mason said quickly, his professional instincts overriding our personal confrontation. I'll wait. I signaled to Tara that I'd take the call, but turned back to Mason. No need to wait. We've said what needed to be said. His expression tightened. Madison, if Eleanor Westlake is calling you about the merger, then that's between Eleanor and me, I finished for him. Professional courtesy, Mason. Something Sterling Partners seems to have forgotten. Tara transferred the call to my phone, and Mason hesitated before collecting his portfolio and moving toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back, at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, I agreed. But it's changing rapidly. After he left, I answered Eleanor's call, steeling myself for whatever new development had prompted her urgent contact. Madison, forgive the intrusion, Eleanor began without preamble. But I've just had the most disturbing conversation with Richard Sterling. I shifted to a more comfortable position, wincing slightly at the pull on my incision. What did he say? He claims you've misrepresented the Westlake negotiation due to personal animosity following your separation from Mason. Read. So they were already establishing their narrative, painting me as a vindictive wife using professional connections to retaliate against my husband. It was predictable but still infuriating. Interesting, I replied carefully. Did Sterling happen to mention when this supposed separation occurred? Eleanor paused briefly. He implied it was an ongoing process. Why do you ask? Because my husband was sharing a penthouse suite at the plaza with Brooke Chandler from the Westlake legal team during my cancer surgery last week, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. I learned of both the affair and the quote-unquote separation when the hotel called about his declined credit card. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I see, Eleanor finally said, her tone considerably cooler. That puts things in rather a different light. I didn't intend to bring personal matters into our professional discussion, I continued. But since Sterling has chosen to attack my credibility by referencing my marriage, I felt you deserved the complete context. Indeed. Eleanor's voice had taken on the measured precision she typically reserved for difficult negotiations. And the concerns you raised about Sterling Partners' post-merger plans for Westlake? Based entirely on documents I reviewed before discovering my husband's infidelity, I assured her. I mentioned them because they seemed at odds with what you've shared about your family's business values, not out of any desire for retribution. Another pause, then. I believe you, Madison, and I find myself increasingly concerned about Sterling. Partners' transparency, both in their business dealings and in their attempts to discredit you. Relief washed over me. Eleanor's judgment carried significant weight in both the art world and business circles. Her belief in my professional integrity mattered. "What will you do about the merger?" I asked, unsure if I was overstepping. "That remains to be determined," she replied carefully. "But I've already instructed my team to request more detailed post-merger operational plans. As for the Porter collection, I've informed Director Phillips that our agreed valuation stands, and any attempt to renegotiate will result in withdrawal of the entire collection from consideration." I smiled despite the pain medications dulling my emotions. "Thank you, Eleanor." "No need for thanks. Integrity in business and art should be standard, not exceptional." She paused. "Now, I suggest you focus on your recovery. The professional world will still be there when you're stronger." After we ended the call, I sat motionless, processing the rapid evolution of events. Mason and Sterling had moved quickly to discredit me, but their strategy had backfired spectacularly. By attempting to portray me as a vindictive ex-wife, they had forced me to reveal the circumstances of Mason's betrayal, destroying any moral high ground they might have claimed. Tara appeared with tea and my afternoon medications. "Based on your expression, that went well?" "Better than expected," I confirmed, accepting the tea gratefully. "Eleanor believes me, not Sterling, and she's demanding more transparency about the post-merger plans. And the Porter collection? Safe. She's standing firm on the valuation." Tara's phone buzzed with a message, drawing her attention momentarily. She frowned at the screen. "That's odd. Director Phillips is calling an all-staff video meeting at Harrison for 5 p.m. today. Mandatory attendance, even for those on leave." I glanced at the clock, nearly 3 p.m. now. "Including me?" The message specifically says all curatorial staff, including those on medical leave. This was unexpected. Phillips rarely called all staff meetings, preferring to communicate through department heads. For him to demand participation from employees on medical leave suggested something significant and potentially problematic. "Set up the call on my laptop," I decided. "Let's see what Phillips is planning." The next 2 hours dragged with anxious anticipation. I rested as much as possible, knowing I would need my wits about me for whatever Phillips had planned. At 10 minutes before 5, Tara arranged my laptop on the coffee table, positioning it so I could participate from the sofa without straining. The video meeting platform filled with familiar faces: curators, assistant curators, administrative staff, all looking equally confused about the unexpected gathering. Director Phillips appeared last, his normally affable expression replaced by something more grave. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice," he began, his voice carrying the formal tone he reserved for board presentations. "As many of you know, Harrison Gallery has been pursuing the Porter Foundation collection for some time, under Madison Reed's expert guidance." My pulse quickened at this direct reference. Tara shot me a questioning look from her position just off camera. "This afternoon," Phillips continued, "I received a call from Eleanor Westlake Porter, head of the foundation, expressing concerns about perceived attempts to undervalue the collection and questioning Harrison's commitment to the acquisition." Murmurs rippled through the virtual gathering. The Porter acquisition had been considered a done deal, a significant achievement for the gallery. Mrs. Westlake Porter specifically mentioned that certain outside parties had suggested Madison Reed's recent medical challenges might have impaired her professional judgment regarding the collection's valuation. I felt dozens of eyes shift to my video tile. Phillips cleared his throat. "I want to be absolutely clear about Harrison's position on this matter. The Porter acquisition valuation was thoroughly vetted by our financial team, endorsed unanimously by the board, and represents a sound investment in contemporary art. Madison Reed's work on this acquisition has been exemplary, and any suggestion that her medical situation has affected her professional judgment is not only unfounded, but deeply inappropriate." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by suspicion. Phillips had been notably silent when Sterling first raised concerns at the board meeting. Why this public defense now? Furthermore, Phillips added, his tone hardening, Harrison Gallery stands firmly behind Madison during her recovery. Any attempt to use her medical situation against her professionally will be met with the full institutional response it deserves. The declaration felt significant, Phillips publicly aligning the gallery with me rather than with Sterling, despite their social connection. Finally, I'm pleased to announce that Mrs. Westlake Porter has reaffirmed the Foundation's commitment to our original agreement. The Porter collection will proceed as planned, with installation beginning next month as Madison returns from medical leave. The meeting continued with various administrative updates, but my mind was racing ahead. Phillips's announcement represented more than a professional victory. It was a public repudiation of Sterling's attempt to undermine me. After the call ended, Tara closed my laptop with a satisfied smile. Well, that was unexpected. Very. I agreed, still processing the implications. Something changed Phillips' position dramatically between the board meeting and today. Eleanor Westlake Porter changed it, Tara suggested. She must have made it clear that Harrison could either stand by you or lose the collection. I nodded slowly. And possibly future Westlake Porter family donations as well. Eleanor's influence extends far beyond this single collection. My phone buzzed with a text from Director Phillips himself. Madison, can we speak privately? I owe you an explanation. I showed the message to Tara, who raised her eyebrows. The plot thickens. Indeed, I replied, typing back, of course, I'm available now if that works for you. Phillips called almost immediately. I put him on speaker so Tara could hear, a precaution that felt necessary given recent events. Madison, thank you for taking my call, he began, his voice carrying a note of genuine contrition. I want to apologize for my failure to defend you, more vigorously at the board meeting when Sterling raised his concerns. I appreciate that, William, I replied, using his first name deliberately to establish our equal professional standing. May I ask what prompted the change in approach? A heavy sigh came through the speaker. To be blunt, Eleanor Westlake Porter made it abundantly clear that Sterling had misrepresented several aspects of the situation, including the nature of your medical leave and certain personal circumstances that Sterling attempted to weaponize against you. Personal circumstances, a delicate euphemism for Mason's betrayal during my cancer surgery. I see, I said carefully. And today's public statement? Was the absolute minimum required given the circumstances, Phillips replied firmly. Harrison should have defended you from the beginning, Madison. I allowed my personal relationship with Richard Sterling to cloud my professional judgment, and for that, I am deeply sorry. His candor was unexpected, but welcome. Phillips had always been more administrator than advocate, carefully navigating the political waters of donor relations and board politics. Thank you, William. I appreciate your transparency and support. There's something else you should know, Phillips added, his tone shifting slightly. Sterling called me after Eleanor's intervention, attempting to pressure Harrison into placing you on extended administrative leave. He suggested the gallery's relationship with several major donors might be reconsidered if we didn't comply. This was a significant escalation, moving from questioning my judgment to actively attempting to remove me from my position. What was your response? I asked, already suspecting the answer based on the all-staff meeting. I informed him that Harrison makes personnel decisions based on professional performance, not external pressure, Phillips stated with unexpected firmness, and that any attempt to interfere with our curatorial staff would be considered a hostile action against the gallery itself. Tara's eyes widened at this uncharacteristically bold stance from our typically conflict-averse director. That must have been an interesting conversation, I observed. Phillips gave a short, humorless laugh. Sterling was not accustomed to hearing no from me, that's certain. But Eleanor Westlake Porter's influence significantly outweighs his in the art world, and she made her support for you quite clear. After we ended the call, Tara brought me a light dinner. which I picked at despite her encouragement to maintain my strength. "Sterling is getting desperate," she observed, watching me push food around my plate. "Trying to get you placed on administrative leave is a major escalation." I nodded, setting aside the barely touched meal. "He's realized I have both knowledge and influence that threaten the Westlake deal. Removing me professionally would isolate me from Eleanor and other potential allies." "What do you think they'll try next?" "Something more direct," I predicted, a chill running through me despite the apartment's comfortable temperature. "Sterling. And Mason won't risk another institutional rebuff like Phillips just delivered. Their next move will target me personally." As if summoned by my prediction, my phone rang with Mason's number. I let it go to voicemail, unwilling to engage without preparation. The notification for his message appeared moments later. "What did he say?" Tara asked, noticing my expression change as I listened to the voicemail. "He wants to meet tomorrow to discuss our situation like adults," I quoted, the condescension in Mason's recorded voice still evident. "He suggests a neutral location, the restaurant where we had our first date." Tara snorted. "Subtle. Trying to invoke nostalgia while he negotiates whatever he's planning next." "Exactly," I agreed. "And notice the timing. Immediately after Phillips publicly supported me at Harrison, suddenly Mason wants to talk. Are you going to meet him?" I considered the question carefully. Avoiding Mason indefinitely wasn't practical or productive. We would eventually need to discuss divorce terms and property division. The question wasn't whether to meet, but how to approach the inevitable confrontation. Yes, I decided, but not at his suggested location, and not alone. The next morning, I felt stronger than I had since the surgery, the combination of a reasonable night's sleep and righteous indignation providing energy that pain medications had dulled. I texted Mason, "Not the restaurant, my attorney's office, 2 p.m., bring your lawyer if you wish." His response came quickly. "Lawyers already? I thought we could discuss this privately first." Given Sterling Partners' attempt to have me placed on administrative leave yesterday, I think legal representation is appropriate, I replied, deliberately letting him know I was aware of their failed maneuver. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as Mason typed, deleted, and reconsidered his response. Finally, "Fine, send the address." I contacted Catherine Dumont, a divorce attorney known for handling high-profile professional couples with both discretion and fierce advocacy. She agreed to see us that afternoon, rearranging her schedule after hearing the basic outlines of my situation. "Bring any financial documents you can access easily," she advised. "And given your recent surgery, would you like me to arrange for a car service?" I accepted gratefully, still under driving restrictions due to pain medications. Tara helped me dress in one of my favorite professional outfits, a navy suit tailored enough to convey authority while still accommodating my healing incision. The simple act of applying makeup and styling my hair provided a psychological boost, returning a sense of control I had sorely missed during my hospital stay. "You look formidable," Tara approved, handing me my portfolio of financial documents. "Ready to negotiate from strength." The car Catherine arranged arrived precisely on time, driven by a discreet professional who helped me navigate from our building to the vehicle. The journey to her downtown office passed in a blur of preparation, mentally reviewing what I knew about our marital assets and what I hoped to achieve from this initial meeting. Catherine met me in the lobby, a striking woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Madison," she greeted warmly, offering a gentle handshake, mindful of my still fragile state. "Let's get you settled in the conference room before your husband arrives." Her office exuded understated power, original artwork on the walls, including a piece from an artist I'd featured at Harrison, furniture that prioritized comfort without sacrificing elegance, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. "Has Mason confirmed he's coming alone?" I asked as Catherine's assistant brought in water and tea. His assistant called to say he's bringing Gerald Fisher from Sterling Partners' legal department, Catherine replied, arranging documents on the polished conference table. An interesting choice for a personal matter. Indeed. Mason choosing Sterling's corporate counsel rather than a personal divorce attorney spoke volumes about the company's involvement in our marital dissolution. Sterling is worried about what I know, I explained, sharing the background on the Westlake merger and Sterling's attempts to undermine me professionally. Catherine listened intently, making occasional notes. So this isn't just about dividing marital assets. It's about protecting your professional reputation and addressing potential business interference. Exactly, I confirmed. The divorce itself is straightforward from my perspective. I want an equitable division of our joint property and investments. But Sterling's involvement complicates matters significantly. And what are your objectives regarding the Westlake situation? Catherine asked carefully. Do you intend to actively interfere with the merger? I considered the question, wanting to be entirely honest with my counsel. I don't seek to sabotage Mason's career or Sterling Partners' business interests, but I won't allow them to damage my professional standing or use my illness against me. If protecting myself affects their merger, that's incidental. Catherine nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. Fair enough, and strategically sound. The intercom buzzed, announcing Mason's arrival with Gerald Fisher. Catherine gave me a reassuring smile. Ready? I straightened in my chair, ignoring the twinge from my healing incision. Absolutely. As Mason entered the conference room, I noticed subtle changes in his appearance. The slight shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that his perfectly tailored suit couldn't quite disguise. The stress of recent days had affected him too, though certainly not as profoundly as cancer surgery had affected me. Gerald Fisher followed, a severe-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown. I recognized him from Sterling Partners events, the legal enforcer brought in when negotiations turned contentious. Madison, Mason greeted, his tone carefully neutral. You're looking well. Cancer surgery sets a low baseline, I replied mildly. Please, have a seat. Catherine took control of the meeting immediately, her warm demeanor replaced by professional precision. Gentlemen, I understand we're here to discuss the parameters of Mr. and Mrs. Reed's separation and potential divorce. However, I must note that Mr. Fisher's presence suggests corporate interests beyond the typical marital dissolution. Fisher adjusted his glasses with a practiced gesture. I'm here merely as a courtesy to Mr. Reed, given his key role at Sterling Partners. The firm has a vested interest in ensuring that sensitive business matters remain appropriately confidential during personal legal proceedings. Interesting, Catherine replied, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. I wasn't aware that sensitive business matters were standard considerations in divorce negotiations. Mason leaned forward, attempting to redirect the conversation. Madison, I was hoping we could discuss this reasonably, without immediately jumping to adversarial positions. Is that why you brought Sterling's legal enforcer to a meeting about our marriage? I asked, keeping my voice even despite the anger simmering beneath. For a reasonable, non-adversarial discussion? Before Mason could respond, Fisher interjected. Mrs. Reed, Sterling Partners is prepared to offer a generous settlement package to expedite this process, contingent upon a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding any proprietary information you may have encountered through your husband's work. The conference room fell silent after Fisher's statement. The audacity of Sterling Partners inserting themselves so directly into our marital dissolution was breathtaking. Let me ensure I understand correctly, Catherine said, her voice carrying the precise chill of a Boston winter. Sterling Partners is offering to pay Mrs. Reed to remain silent about information she legitimately obtained during her marriage? Fisher adjusted his glasses again, a nervous tic that betrayed his discomfort. We're simply acknowledging that during the course of their marriage, Mrs. Reed may have been exposed to confidential business information. Standard corporate protocol requires protection of such proprietary data. There's nothing standard about this situation, Mr. Fisher, Catherine replied. Your client abandoned his wife during cancer surgery to be with another woman, who happens to be involved in your Westlake negotiations. Now you're attempting to buy her silence rather than addressing the actual marital dissolution. Mason shifted, uncomfortably in his chair. That's not exactly... It's precisely what's happening, I interrupted, finding strength in Catherine's unflinching assessment. Mason, did you really think I would sign away my right to speak truthfully about what I know in exchange for money? This isn't about money, Mason insisted, though his averted gaze suggested otherwise. It's about protecting sensitive business information while we work through our personal situation. Our personal situation became a business matter the moment you involved Brooke Chandler and Sterling Partners in it, I pointed out. You made that choice, not me. Fisher cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss specific terms. Sterling Partners is prepared to offer... Mr. Fisher, Catherine interjected smoothly. My client isn't interested in being paid for silence. She's interested in an equitable division of marital assets and appropriate compensation for the extraordinary circumstances of this dissolution. Mason leaned forward, his expression hardening. What exactly does that mean? Catherine opened a folder on the table. It means acknowledging that your abandonment during Mrs. Reed's cancer treatment, your affair with a business associate, and your firm's subsequent attempts to undermine her professionally constitute circumstances that merit consideration in settlement discussions. She slid a document across the table. We've prepared an initial proposal that addresses these factors. Fisher reached for the document, but Mason intercepted it, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. This is absurd, he declared, pushing the paper away. You're asking for 70% of our marital assets and ongoing support despite Madison's substantial independent income. I'm asking for acknowledgement of the actual circumstances, I corrected him. You chose career advancement and an affair over our marriage during my cancer treatment. That choice has consequences. Consequences that appear designed to cripple me financially, Mason retorted, his professional composure cracking. This feels punitive, Madison. Interesting, Catherine observed. When Sterling Partners attempts to have my client removed from her professional position during cancer recovery, that's apparently business. When Mrs. Reed requests appropriate compensation for extraordinary marital misconduct, that's punitive. Fisher removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose in evident frustration. This approach isn't productive. Perhaps we should reschedule. When emotions aren't running so high. My emotions aren't driving this discussion, Mr. Fisher, I said quietly. My clarity is. For the first time since discovering my husband's betrayal, I'm seeing the situation with perfect clarity. I turned my attention directly to Mason. You and Sterling Partners have attempted to discredit me professionally, isolate me from allies like Eleanor Westlake Porter, and now buy my silence with a settlement contingent on an NDA. Each of these actions reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of both my character and my position. And what exactly is your position? Mason asked, his tone somewhere between defensive and genuinely curious. My position is that I will not be silenced, sidelined, or bought off. I will protect my professional reputation and personal dignity by whatever legitimate means necessary. I met his gaze directly. I don't seek to destroy you or Sterling Partners, Mason, but I won't allow you to destroy me either. For a brief moment, something like recognition flashed in Mason's eyes, perhaps a glimpse of the woman he had married, the partner whose strength had once complemented his own. Then the moment passed, replaced by the calculated assessment of a negotiator seeking leverage. What exactly do you want, Madison? He asked bluntly. A fair divorce settlement that acknowledges the circumstances of our separation. No interference with my professional standing at Harrison or in the wider art world. and a formal retraction of any statements Sterling Partners has made questioning my competence or judgment. And the Westlake merger? Fisher interjected, revealing their true concern. I turned to him calmly. I have no interest in actively sabotaging Mason's business dealings. But I won't lie if directly asked about what I know, and I won't sign away my right to speak truthfully. Mason and Fisher exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. We'll need to discuss this with Richard Sterling, Fisher said finally, gathering his papers. Your terms represent a significant departure from our initial approach. My client's position is non-negotiable regarding her professional standing and right to speak truthfully, Catherine stated firmly. The financial terms may have flexibility, but those principles do not. As they prepared to leave, I addressed Mason directly once more. One more thing. I'll be returning to work at Harrison part-time next week, as my recovery allows. I expect no further attempts to interfere with my position there. Mason hesitated at the door. Madison, despite everything, I never wanted to harm your career. That was Sterling's approach, not mine. The distinction felt meaningless. You didn't stop him either. Your silence was compliance, Mason. After they departed, Catherine turned to me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You handled that remarkably well for someone less than 2 weeks post-surgery. Righteous indignation provides excellent motivation, I replied, suddenly feeling the fatigue I'd been pushing aside. Do you think they'll accept our terms? Catherine considered this thoughtfully. They'll counter on the financial aspects, certainly, but I suspect they'll concede on the professional non-interference. Sterling has already been rebuffed publicly by Phillips and Eleanor Westlake Porter. Continuing that battle would be counterproductive. And the NDA they wanted me to sign? They'll still push for some form of confidentiality, but will ensure it's narrowly tailored to legitimate business interests, not blanket silence. The car service returned me home, where Tara waited anxiously for an update. I recounted the meeting while she prepared tea and my afternoon medications. So they actually tried to buy your silence? She asked incredulously. After everything else they've done, Sterling Partners deals with most problems by throwing money at them, I explained, settling carefully onto the sofa. It's their default approach. What do you think they'll do next? Before I could answer, my phone chimed with an email notification. The sender's name made my heart skip. Brooke Chandler. Speaking of next moves, I murmured, showing Tara the screen. Mason's mistress is emailing you? Tara's voice rose with disbelief. The audacity of these people is truly breathtaking. I opened the message, unsure what to expect. Madison, you don't know me, though you know of me. I understand how that email sounds coming from me to you, and I won't insult your intelligence with platitudes or apologies that would mean nothing. I'm writing because I believe you deserve to know the full truth about the Westlake merger and Mason's role in it. Sterling Partners is not being honest with the Westlake family, but more relevantly to your situation, they haven't been honest with Mason either. I would like to meet privately to share information that may affect both your negotiations and my professional future. I have documentation that Sterling has deliberately misled both the Westlake board and their own partners about post-merger plans. I understand if you refuse, but please know this outreach is not coordinated with Mason or Sterling. In fact, they would be furious if they knew I was contacting you. If you're willing to meet, please suggest a time and place of your choosing. I will come alone and bring the relevant documents. Brooke Chandler. I read the email twice, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda. The message seemed straightforward, though coming from the woman who had been with my husband during my surgery, nothing felt simple. It could be a trap, Tara suggested, reading over my shoulder. Sterling and Mason trying another approach since the settlement offer failed. Possibly, I acknowledged. But what if it's genuine? What if Brooke has actually turned against them? Even if she has, why would she reach out to you? You're literally the last person she should expect help from. It was a fair question. What would motivate Mason's mistress to contact his wife, offering information that could potentially damage both Mason and Sterling Partners? Professional self-preservation, perhaps, I speculated. If Sterling has been misleading everyone about the merger, Brooke might be protecting herself from blowback when the truth emerges. Or, Tara suggested with a raised eyebrow, she's discovered that Mason was using her professionally just as he used you personally. Hell hath no fury and all that. The possibility had merit. If Mason had leveraged his relationship with Brooke to gain inside information about Westlake's negotiating position, then discarded or betrayed her once he had what he needed, she might, indeed, seek allies against him. I think I should meet her, I decided, but with precautions. You can't be serious, Tara protested. Meeting your husband's mistress while you're still recovering from surgery? That's beyond reasonable, Madison. Knowledge is power in this situation, I countered. If Brooke genuinely has information about Sterling's tactics, it could be valuable in my negotiations. And if it's a trap, then we ensure it's a trap that fails. I began typing a reply to Brooke. Ms. Chandler, I appreciate your directness. I'm willing to meet with conditions. The meeting will take place at my attorney's office with Catherine Dumont present. 2. You may bring documentation but no other attendees. 3. Our discussion will be recorded for my protection. If these terms are acceptable, we can meet tomorrow at 1 p.m. Madison Reed. I showed the draft to Tara before sending it. This protects me legally while still allowing the meeting to happen. Duthsai nodded reluctantly. It's better than meeting her alone, certainly, but I still don't trust her motivation. Neither do I admitted. But sometimes the most valuable information comes from unexpected sources. Brooke replied within minutes, accepting all conditions and confirming the meeting time. I forwarded the exchange to Catherine, who responded with cautious approval and confirmation that she would arrange the meeting room and recording equipment. That evening, as Tara prepared dinner, my phone rang with a familiar number, Director Phillips from Harrison Gallery. Madison, I hope I'm not disturbing your recovery, he began when I answered. Not at all, William. What can I do for you? He hesitated briefly. I've received a rather unusual call from Sterling Partners Public Relations Director. They're issuing a statement tomorrow, clarifying their position regarding your work on the Porter acquisition. My pulse quickened. What kind of clarification? A formal retraction of any suggestion that your medical situation affected your professional judgment, along with an expression of deep respect for your curatorial expertise. Phillips sounded genuinely puzzled. It's quite extraordinary, Madison. I've never known Sterling to publicly retract anything. This was an unexpected development, and a significant one. Sterling Partners was preemptively addressing one of my key demands before Mason and Fisher had even returned with a formal response to our settlement proposal. Did they explain this sudden change of heart? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Not directly. The PR director mentioned something about correcting misimpressions and acknowledging Harrison Gallery's valuable institutional expertise. Phillips paused. Madison, what exactly happened in your meeting today? I chose my words carefully, aware that Phillips still maintained social connections with Sterling despite his recent professional stance. Let's just say Sterling Partners is reassessing their approach to certain situations, including their comments about my work. Well, whatever caused this reassessment, it's a positive development for Harrison, Phillips noted. And for you personally, I imagine. After we ended the call, I shared the news with Tara, who looked equal parts impressed and suspicious. They're giving in on the professional aspect without even countering? She asked. That doesn't seem like Sterling's usual aggressive approach. Something's changed the calculation, I agreed. The question is what, and whether it's connected to Brooke Chandler's outreach. Later that evening, after taking my pain medication, I found myself examining a framed photo of Mason and me from a charity gala 2 years earlier. We were smiling, glasses raised in celebration of Harrison's successful fundraising campaign. I had been so proud that night, of my work, of our partnership, of the life we were building together. Had it all been an illusion? Had Mason been calculating his movements even then, assessing relationships and opportunities with the cold precision of a chess player, rather than the genuine investment of a partner? I carefully returned the photo to the shelf, not yet ready to discard these memories despite their newly complicated nature. Whatever Mason had become, or perhaps always been beneath the surface, those moments had still shaped my life, brought me to where I stood now. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Madison, it's Eleanor Westlake Porter. I've heard rumblings about tomorrow's meeting with Brooke Chandler. Please call me before you speak with her. I have relevant context to share. I stared at the message in surprise. How had Eleanor learned about a meeting I had arranged less than 2 hours ago? The information networks in Boston's business community were evidently even more efficient than I'd realized. I texted back, "We'll call first thing tomorrow. Is there anything I should know immediately?" Her response came quickly. Only that there are layers to this situation beyond what either Mason or Sterling has disclosed. Proceed with extreme caution. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled. With faceless figures exchanging documents in shadowed rooms, Eleanor Westlake Porter examining artifacts with a magnifying glass, Mason and Brooke watching from opposite corners as I struggled to decipher text that kept shifting on the page. Woke early, my surgical incision throbbing despite the medication. The physical discomfort seemed appropriate somehow, a tangible reminder of both vulnerability and healing as I navigated the day's complex emotional terrain. After a light breakfast and my morning medications, I called Eleanor as promised. Madison, thank you for reaching out before your meeting, she began without preamble. I understand Brooke Chandler has offered you information about the Westlake merger. Yes, I confirmed, still curious how this information had traveled so quickly. She claims Sterling Partners has misled both the Westlake board and their own partners about post-merger plans. That's partially accurate, Eleanor said carefully, but Brooke's involvement is more complicated than she may have presented. I reached for a notepad, instinctively documenting this conversation as I would any important professional exchange. How so? Brooke was originally hired by my son-in-law, James Westlake, to monitor the merger negotiations from the inside. She was placed at Sterling Partners with a manufactured resume and reputation, tasked with reporting back to James about Sterling's true intentions. This revelation stunned me into momentary silence. Brooke Chandler, the woman I had imagined as simply my husband's mistress, was actually a corporate plant working for the Westlake family. So her relationship with Mason, I began trying to process this new complexity, was initially part of her assignment, Eleanor confirmed, her tone gentle but direct. James asked her to get close to the Sterling Partners negotiation team. Your husband was the lead on the Westlake acquisition, and Mason had no idea she was reporting back to the Westlakes? None whatsoever as far as we know. Brooke provided valuable intelligence about Sterling's post-merger plans for months before. Eleanor hesitated. Before the relationship became genuine, I finished for her, the irony almost too perfect. Before she actually fell for him. Yes, Eleanor acknowledged. James noticed her reports becoming less detailed, more sympathetic to Mason's position. When confronted, Brooke admitted the relationship had evolved beyond her initial assignment. Absorbed this information, rearranging the narrative I had constructed. Does Mason know any of this now? We don't believe so. James removed Brooke from the assignment when her objectivity became compromised, but allowed her to maintain her position at Sterling Partners to avoid raising suspicion. And now she's reaching out to me. I mused, the pieces still not quite fitting together. Why would she risk exposing herself this way? Eleanor's response was measured. I believe something has changed in her relationship with Mason. Perhaps he's betrayed her as he betrayed you. Or perhaps she's discovered Sterling's plans are more problematic than even she had reported. Or, I suggested, following the logic, she's still working for James Westlake, and this outreach is part of a new strategy. That possibility can't be discounted, Eleanor admitted. The Westlake board meets tomorrow to vote on the merger. The timing of Brooke's outreach to you seems unlikely to be coincidental. After thanking Eleanor for her candor, I ended the call and sat in stunned contemplation of this new information. The situation had evolved from a painful personal betrayal to something resembling corporate espionage, with my husband unwittingly caught between powerful business interests while betraying his marriage. I called Catherine immediately, sharing Eleanor's revelations and discussing how this changed our approach to the afternoon meeting with Brooke. This adds several layers of complexity, Catherine observed, but potentially gives us significant leverage if Brooke is indeed still working for the Westlakes. How should we handle the meeting? I asked, trusting her strategic assessment. Let's hear what she has to say without revealing what we know about her connection to James Westlake, Catherine suggested. Her information may still be valuable, regardless of her motivation for sharing it. As I prepared to leave for Catherine's office, my phone chimed with an incoming email from Mason. The subject line was simple: Settlement Proposal, Revised. I opened it quickly, scanning the attached document with growing surprise. Sterling Partners had completely withdrawn their request for an NDA regarding the Westlake merger. The financial terms had been adjusted to a more equitable 55-45 split of marital assets in my favor, along with significant support during my cancer recovery. Most surprisingly, the document included a personal statement from Mason Madison. This revised proposal reflects my acknowledgement of the pain my actions have caused. While no settlement can undo that harm, I hope this represents a step toward resolution that respects your position and allows both of us to move forward. Whatever you may believe now, I did love you. That truth exists alongside my failures as a husband. The timing of this revised offer, coming just hours before my scheduled meeting with Brooke Chandler, seemed unlikely to be coincidental. Something had shifted dramatically in the dynamic between Mason, Sterling Partners, and the Westlake negotiations. As Tara helped me into my coat, preparing for the car service Catherine had arranged, she noticed my thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked. "You look like you've had another revelation." "Not a revelation," I replied, carefully tucking Mason's email into my portfolio. "Just a growing certainty that today represents a turning point. Not just in my divorce, but in something larger that we're only beginning to understand." Catherine's office hummed with quiet tension as we waited for Brooke Chandler to arrive. The recording equipment was discreetly positioned, the conference room arranged to give me the psychological advantage of facing the door. I had chosen to sit with my back to the windows, Boston Harbor spreading behind me like a silent ally. "Remember," Catherine advised, reviewing our strategy one final time, "we don't reveal what Eleanor told us unless absolutely necessary. Let Brooke present her information first." I nodded, adjusting my position to minimize discomfort from my healing incision. "And Mason's revised settlement offer? We acknowledge it was received, but make no commitments until after this meeting." Catherine glanced at her watch. "She should be here any minute." As if summoned by the words, Catherine's assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Chandler has arrived. Show her in, please." Brooke Chandler was not what I had expected. In my imagination, I had constructed an image of someone flashier, more obviously alluring, a caricature born of hurt and betrayal. The woman who entered was elegant but subdued, dressed in a conservative gray suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple chignon. She could have been any rising professional in Boston's financial district, except for her eyes. They carried a wariness, a hypervigilance that I recognized from my own mirror in recent weeks. The look of someone navigating treacherous waters, Mrs. Reed, she began, then quickly corrected herself. Madison, thank you for agreeing to meet. Ms. Chandler, I acknowledged coolly. This is my attorney, Catherine Dumont. Brooke shook Catherine's hand before carefully placing a leather portfolio on the conference table. I've brought the documents I mentioned. Before we begin, I want to clarify that I'm here without Mason's knowledge or Sterling Partners' approval. So, you've said, I replied neutrally. What exactly do you believe I should know about the Westlake merger? Brooke took a steadying breath. Sterling Partners has been operating a dual-track negotiation with Westlake Technologies, an official version presented to the Westlake board and a separate internal strategy that contradicts those promises. She opened her portfolio, removing a series of documents. These are internal memos outlining the post-merger plans for Westlake. They detail significant workforce reductions, the offshoring of manufacturing divisions, and the dismantling of Westlake's employee profit-sharing program, all directly contrary to assurances Sterling has made during negotiations. I examined the documents, noting their authenticity markers, proper letterhead, consistent formatting, executive signatures including Richard Sterling's own distinctive scrawl. How did you obtain these? Catherine asked, the lawyer's instinct for provenance evident in her tone. Brooke hesitated before answering. I had access through my role on the legal team, and through my relationship with Mason. A relationship that began while he was still married to me, I observed, unable to keep the edge from my voice despite my professional resolve. To my surprise, Brooke met my gaze directly. Yes, I won't insult you by pretending it was anything. Other than what it was. And what exactly was it, Ms. Chandler? I asked, genuinely curious about her perception of their relationship. She seemed taken aback by the direct question. It was complicated. Most affairs are, I noted dryly. But I'm more interested in why you're sharing these documents with me now. What changed? Brooke clasped her hands tightly on the table. 2 days ago, I discovered that Mason and Richard Sterling have been developing a secondary plan, one that involves sacrificing me legally if the Westlake board discovers the deception. She pulled another document from her portfolio. This is an internal memo prepared by Gerald Fisher, Sterling's legal counsel. It outlines a strategy to claim I acted, without authorization if the dual-track negotiation is exposed, essentially making me the scapegoat for corporate fraud. I reviewed the document, noting Fisher's clinical language describing how Brooke could be positioned as a rogue actor who misrepresented corporate intentions without senior approval. So Mason was willing to sacrifice you professionally to protect himself and Sterling, I summarized, understanding dawning. Just as he was willing to sacrifice our marriage for his career advancement. Yes. Brooke's voice was barely above a whisper. When I confronted him, he claimed it was just a contingency plan that would never be implemented. But I've seen enough to know better. Catherine leaned forward. Ms. Chandler, while this information is certainly compelling, I'm curious why you're bringing it to Madison specifically. There are regulatory authorities, whistleblower protections. Because Madison already has Eleanor Westlake Porter's ear, Brooke interrupted. And the Westlake board votes tomorrow. There isn't time for regulatory investigations or whistleblower procedures. I studied her carefully, searching for deception or manipulation in her expression. And what do you hope to gain from this disclosure? Protection, she answered simply. I want my name explicitly removed from Sterling's contingency plan before I'm professionally destroyed. And she hesitated. I believe you deserve to know the full truth about the man who betrayed you. Something in her directness rang true, despite my natural skepticism. I exchanged glances with Catherine, who gave a subtle nod encouraging me to proceed. Ms. Chandler, there's something else you should know before we continue. I placed my hands flat on the table, a gesture of calculated openness. I'm aware that you were originally placed at Sterling Partners by James Westlake to monitor the merger negotiations from the inside. The color drained from Brooke's face. Her composure cracked momentarily, revealing genuine shock. "How did you— Eleanor?" "Westlake Porter informed me this morning," I explained. "She suggested your outreach might be part of a continuing assignment for the Westlake family." Brooke closed her eyes briefly, reassembling her composure. "That's partially true. I was initially placed by James Westlake, but I was removed from that assignment months ago, when my involvement with Mason compromised my objectivity." "And now?" Catherine prompted. "Now I'm acting solely to protect myself professionally," Brooke insisted. "James Westlake abandoned me to my fate when I was no longer useful. Mason is preparing to sacrifice me to save the merger. I have no allies left except perhaps the one person who truly understands what it means to be discarded by Mason Reed." The irony was almost poetic. Mason's wife and mistress, both betrayed, finding common cause in their shared experience of his calculated self-interest. "These documents," I said, tapping the stack she had provided. "What exactly do you want me to do with them?" "Share them with Eleanor Westlake Porter," Brooke replied immediately. "She has the influence to stop the merger vote tomorrow. And—" she hesitated. "I've included evidence that clears me personally of involvement in the deception. I need someone with Eleanor's standing to verify that I was not a party to the fraud." I considered her request carefully. Using these documents, as Brooke suggested, would effectively destroy the Westlake merger, and by extension, Mason's career advancement at Sterling Partners. It would be a devastating professional blow. Justice served coldly and completely for his personal betrayal. Yet something in me hesitated. Not out of lingering affection or misplaced loyalty, but from recognition that responding to betrayal with destruction would change me in ways I wasn't certain I wanted to be changed. "I need to consider how best to use this information," I said, finally. "Not just for maximum impact, but for the right impact." Brooke looked disappointed, but nodded. "I understand. But please remember, the board votes tomorrow. Whatever you decide needs to happen quickly." After Brooke departed, Catherine and I reviewed the documents thoroughly, verifying their authenticity and discussing potential approaches. "These are extremely damaging," Catherine observed. "If shared with Eleanor and the Westlake board, they would almost certainly kill the merger and trigger significant legal consequences for Sterling Partners." "And for Mason personally?" "Professional devastation," Catherine confirmed. "His career at Sterling would be effectively over. No reputable firm would touch him after this kind of exposure. The power I now held was undeniable. The ability to destroy Mason's career with a single phone call to Eleanor Westlake Porter. It was, in many ways, the perfect symmetry of justice. He had abandoned me during my physical crisis. I could now devastate him during his professional one." "I need some time," I told Catherine. "Can you arrange for copies of these documents while I consider our approach?" Back at my apartment, Tara helped me settle on the sofa, bringing tea and a light lunch that I barely touched. My mind was consumed with the decision before me. "You have every right to use those documents," Tara said, noticing my preoccupation. "After what he did to you, abandoning you during cancer surgery, then trying to undermine you professionally, complete career destruction seems entirely justified." "It does," I agreed. And yet what?" Tara prompted when I didn't. "Continue." I struggled to articulate the conflict within me. Using these documents exactly as Brooke suggests would be effective. It would destroy Mason professionally, possibly permanently. But it would also make me someone who responds to hurt with calculated destruction. "Some would call that justice," Tara pointed out. "Perhaps. But what kind of justice requires me to become more like the person who hurt me?" I sighed, the weight of the decision settling heavily. There must be a way to ensure accountability without embracing the same calculating approach that Mason and Sterling employed. As evening fell over Boston Harbor, I made my decision. I called Eleanor Westlake Porter directly, arranging to meet her at her Beacon Hill home rather than discuss the matter over the phone. Her historic brownstone was elegant without ostentation, filled with thoughtfully curated art and furnishings that reflected generations of refined taste. Eleanor welcomed me into her study, concern evident in her expression as she noted my careful movements, still limited by surgical recovery. "Madison, you shouldn't be out and about so soon after surgery," she chided gently, helping me to a comfortable chair, "though I appreciate the urgency that brings you here." I placed the portfolio of documents on the coffee table between us. Brooke Chandler provided these earlier today. They confirm what I suspected about Sterling Partners' dual-track approach to the Westlake merger. Eleanor examined the documents carefully, her expression growing increasingly grave. "This is worse than we anticipated. The disparity between their public proposals and internal plans is stark enough to constitute fraud." "Yes," I agreed. "And according to Brooke, Sterling has prepared a contingency plan to sacrifice her legally if the deception is discovered." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Just as James suspected. That's why he removed her from her assignment. He feared she was becoming too visible, too vulnerable within Sterling's operation. She believes she's been abandoned by everyone, James Westlake, Mason, Sterling Partners. She came to me hoping I would use these documents to stop the merger and protect her professionally." "Which you could certainly do," Eleanor observed, studying me with perceptive eyes. "Yet something tells me you're considering a different approach." I nodded, having refined my thinking during the journey to her home. Complete destruction of the merger, and by extension Mason's career, would be justified but ultimately unsatisfying. It would make me a destroyer rather than a builder. That's not who I am, nor who I want to become. What alternative are you considering? I outlined my proposal carefully, a surgical intervention rather than wholesale destruction, designed to achieve accountability while preserving what could be salvaged ethically. "Instead of exposing these documents to the entire board tomorrow, you could use them in a private meeting with Richard Sterling tonight. Demand specific, binding changes to the merger agreement that honor the promises made to Westlake employees. Require Sterling to remove Mason from the Westlake team entirely and place Brooke under formal whistleblower protection." Eleanor considered this thoughtfully. "Accountability without annihilation." Exactly. Sterling and Mason would face significant professional consequences: the loss of the merger as originally envisioned, Mason's removal from the deal he's built his recent career around, but not complete destruction. "And why show this restraint?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "After what Mason did to you personally," I thought carefully before answering. "Because responding to betrayal with proportional consequences rather than maximum destruction preserves something essential in me. I don't want this experience to transform me into someone whose primary satisfaction comes from others' downfall, even when deserved." Eleanor studied me with new appreciation. "That's an uncommon wisdom, Madison. Many in your position would choose the path of maximum impact." "I'm not interested in becoming like Mason or Sterling," I replied simply. "Their calculation, their willingness to sacrifice others for advancement, that's not a victory I want." After further discussion, Eleanor agreed to my approach. She would meet with Richard Sterling that evening, using the documents to force significant revisions to the merger agreement and Mason's removal from the project. "And Brooke?" I asked. "Will you ensure her professional protection?" Eleanor nodded. "James still feels responsible for placing her in this position. We'll ensure she's protected from legal repercussions, though her future at Sterling is likely finished regardless." As I prepared to leave, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on my arm. "You're demonstrating remarkable grace, Madison. I hope you know that." "Not grace," I corrected her. "Clarity. I'm choosing who I want to be in response to betrayal. That's entirely different from forgiveness." The next morning, I woke to multiple notifications on my phone. The first was an email from Eleanor, sent at 2 a.m. Madison meeting with Sterling concluded as planned. Confronted with the documents, he agreed to all conditions: binding protections for Westlake employees, removal of offshoring provisions, and Mason's immediate reassignment away from the merger team. Brooke will receive formal whistleblower protection and a severance package that acknowledges her role in exposing the dual-track negotiation. The board vote will proceed today with the revised agreement. Sterling is chastened but salvaged. Mason is professionally diminished but not destroyed. As you wished, proportional consequences rather than annihilation. You've handled this situation with remarkable wisdom. When you're fully recovered, I hope you'll consider joining the Porter Foundation board. We need more voices like yours. Eleanor. The second notification was a voicemail from Mason, his voice strained and subdued. Madison. I've just been removed from the Westlake merger team. Sterling says it was a condition of saving the deal after our dual-track approach was exposed. I don't know how you did it, but I recognize your hand in this. You could have destroyed me completely. The documents Brooke provided would have ended my career entirely. The fact that you didn't, it's more mercy than I deserve. The revised settlement offer stands. Whatever you decide is acceptable. I won't contest it. I know this doesn't change what happened between us. Nothing can undo my betrayal during your surgery. But thank you for not becoming what I became. It would have been justified, but thank you. The final notification was a text from Catherine. News about Sterling's strategic realignment of the Westlake merger team is spreading through financial circles. Mason effectively demoted. Your approach worked perfectly. Call when you're ready to finalize the settlement. I set the phone aside, moving carefully to the window that overlooked Boston Harbor. The morning sunlight scattered diamonds across the water, the city beginning another day of ambition, connection, and complicated human endeavor. In choosing proportional consequences over maximum destruction, I had preserved something essential in myself while still ensuring accountability. Mason would face significant professional setbacks, a striking demotion, loss of the career-making deal he had pursued so ruthlessly, diminished standing at Sterling Partners. These consequences directly mirrored the pain his choices had caused me. As he had dismissed my needs during a critical medical crisis, he now faced professional demotion during a critical career juncture. Justice, served with precision rather than rage. 6 months later, I stood in Harrison Gallery's main exhibition, Space, overseeing final preparations for the opening of the Porter collection. My recovery had progressed steadily, my strength returning in parallel with my professional momentum. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, with Mason accepting the equitable terms we had proposed without contest. Eleanor Westlake Porter joined me, admiring the centerpiece installation, a contemporary sculpture representing transformation through challenge. It's magnificent, she observed, worth every moment of negotiation to secure it for Harrison. Thank you for standing firm on the valuation, I replied. That was the beginning of reclaiming my professional standing. You did that yourself, Madison. Eleanor studied me with warmth. Have you decided about joining the Porter Foundation board? The position remains open. I nodded. I'll accept. My experience has given me a perspective I didn't have before, about power, ethics, and the kind of legacy we create through our choices. Speaking of choices, Eleanor said carefully, I heard Mason has left Sterling Partners. He's taken a position with a smaller firm in Chicago. The news didn't surprise me. After his removal from the Westlake merger, Mason's standing at Sterling had deteriorated steadily. What did surprise me was my own reaction, a calm acknowledgement untinged by either satisfaction or regret. I hope he finds what he's looking for, I said simply, and perhaps learn from the experience. And Brooke Chandler has accepted a position with a regulatory compliance firm in New York, Eleanor added. James helped arrange it, a final acknowledgement of her complicated role in all this. As guests began arriving for the exhibition preview, Director Phillips approached with champagne flutes. "To Madison Reed," he toasted, "whose vision and perseverance made this extraordinary collection possible." I accepted the toast with genuine pleasure, surveying the room filled with colleagues, artists, patrons, and friends who had supported me through recovery, both physical and emotional. My mother appeared, at my side, squeezing my hand gently. "You look more like yourself than you have in months," she observed. "I feel more like myself," I agreed. "Or perhaps a better version, stronger where I was tested, clearer about what matters." Later that evening, as the successful preview wound down, I found myself alone in the gallery, contemplating the journey of the past several months. From the shock of diagnosis through the pain of betrayal to the power of measured response, each step had shaped the woman I had become. Mason had abandoned me during my greatest vulnerability, choosing ambition and desire over commitment and compassion. He hadn't known that in doing so, he had handed me the very power that would later reshape his career. But more importantly, he hadn't anticipated that I would use that power with precision rather than vengeance, maintaining my integrity even when justified destruction was within reach. That choice defined me more than the betrayal ever could. In refusing to become calculatingly destructive, even when betrayed, I had preserved and strengthened my essential self. The power I held wasn't just over Mason's career, but over my own response to injury, the power to choose who I would become in the face of profound betrayal. As I turned out the gallery lights, leaving the magnificent collection in darkness, until tomorrow's public opening, I felt a sense of completion. Not because justice had been perfectly served, but because I had navigated the darkest waters of betrayal without losing sight of who I was and who I wished to become. That, perhaps, was the greatest power of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.